Welcome everyone to our session as part of the East Coast Greenways, Southeast Greenways and Trails Summit, our virtual summit in lieu of having our conference in Jacksonville. Certainly want to thank our sponsors, everybody who has supported and continues to support the Greenway as we have adapted and overcome to do this virtually instead of in person as we'd originally planned. Today's session is all about trail advocacy, raising a nonprofit from conception to adolescence, and it's being co-presented by myself. I'm Brent, Buice, the Georgia and South Carolina coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and Maggie Ardito, the president of St. John's River to Sea Loop Alliance, and Maggie will be taking over the second half of the presentation. So what we want to talk about today is local advocacy organizations, building them from scratch, making them stronger. Why do we need local advocacy organizations? Well, the vision of the East Coast Greenway Alliance, which is a strong and growing nonprofit, is very ambitious. We're trying to create a continuous network of trails from Maine to Florida through hundreds of different communities and jurisdictions, rural areas, small towns, dozens of different state DOTs and DOT districts. And that's a very complicated and ambitious endeavor. And the only way we're going to be able to do it successfully is if we have strong local advocacy organizations pressing for the Greenway to be developed in their backyard. To get an organization started, the first thing you need is a vision. What do you want your community to look like in 25 years? Do you want it to be, for instance, a place where people of all ages and abilities can gather in safe public places and move around their community, both for transportation and for recreation, by foot, by bicycle, on a wheelchair, and any kind of non-motorized means? You have to establish that vision first things first. Second, the value of local advocacy is that once you've got that vision, the local advocacy organization is the official and formal voice for advancing that vision. It's great for a handful of people who meet over coffee or beers to have a vision, but that vision is only going to be realized if you've got an organized voice that is advancing it and trying to get the community to realize it. And the best way to do that is to have a strategy, to have goals and objectives that are moving you towards realizing that vision. Here's some examples of different types of local advocacy groups that I've been experienced with in Georgia. Bike Athens has been around since the 1990s. You can see from their logo, Support Transportation Choices, that their focus and their vision is around people being able to have daily transportation where they rely on their bicycle or their feet or public transit. That's one way to approach local advocacy. Similarly, in Savannah, we have Bike Walk Savannah, which is a nonprofit that's trying to make Savannah a safe place for people of all ages and abilities to walk and bicycle and have great connections to transit. A different approach is a relatively new nonprofit called Friends of Tied to Town. Tied to Town is an envisioned network of 30 miles of multi-use paths and greenways in Savannah. The Friends of Tied to Town organization is exclusively focused on getting that network of trails finished, while their friends and partners, which Maggie will be talking a lot about, partnerships, are working on the connections from the trail to neighborhoods and to places of business and other community resources. So the two organizations have very similar visions and missions, but one is much more specific to a particular piece of infrastructure, while the other encompasses a broader range of programs and activities that can connect people to that trail system. And then finally, up in Northwest Georgia in the city of Rome, there's an organization called TREAD, which stands for Trails for Recreation and Economic Development. As is explicit in their name, they're not looking at transportation issues and day-to-day mobility concerns. They're more concerned with developing trail systems, both paved and unpaved, that are going to draw tourists to their very beautiful part of the state and are going to help them boost economic activity through people coming for triathlons and running events, 5Ks, things like that. So a very different kind of vision for their community. And what you decide on for your local group is going to really be dictated by what the community wants and what the community needs and the people who come together to help establish the organization in the first place. Speaking of, how do we create a strategy? First of all, we have to do some strategic planning. The initial group of people who are probably going to meet over coffee and be kind of griping about the issues that concern them. It's not safe to cross the street. There's nowhere to ride a bicycle. My kids can't ride their bike to the park nearby. All of that is going to be the genesis for creating the organization in the first place. And that's going to lead to establishing a vision. The first group of folks who meet are going to be the initial steering committee. Many of them will probably evolve into the first board of directors. And the first thing that steering committee and inaugural board of directors needs to do is establish the vision. It should be a short paragraph, no more than a page, that's describing what you want your community to look like in 25 years. As an example, your vision may be something along the lines of, we want people, regardless of their age or physical ability, to be able to walk and safely bike to anywhere that they want to go within our community. And you can describe what that looks like, how it's low stress, how there are tree-lined paths, how there are safe bike lanes that are connected to each other. All of that ultimately feeds into your mission statement. There's plenty of guidance out there online about how to craft a careful and effective mission statement, but it needs to be one sentence, short, to the point, about what your organization is doing. You want it to feed into goals. The vision describes what you're after for your whole community. The mission is a one-sentence statement about what your organization does. For example, our organization strives to make our city a safe place for walking and bicycling, for recreation and transportation. That could be an example of a mission. How you fulfill that mission and how you get to realize the vision for your community that you've laid out is by setting 3 to 5 realistic goals. Goals could be something to the effect of, we want our community to adopt a master plan for walking and bicycling routes. It's achievable, but it's ambitious. It's got something that you can actually celebrate as a win. And the way you get there is by developing objectives. You can see that this is a funnel. You start with the big vision, you work towards goals that are getting something concrete accomplished, and then you develop objectives. The most important point about objectives is to make sure that they're highly specific. You need an objective to state who is doing what by when. A specific person has to be assigned to the objective. The objective has to be very clear what specifically is being accomplished, and perhaps most importantly, it has to have a deadline, otherwise it'll just hang out there. When you're thinking about objectives and the galaxy of things that a local advocacy organization can do, it can be useful to think about it in 2 silos, programs versus campaigns. A program is generally an ongoing activity that has a slow build and is a way to engage volunteers who may not be entirely sure what you're about, but they want to do something where they plug into the community to make it a better place. A campaign, on the other hand, has a clear win. It's something that can be celebrated, and it generally involves some kind of call to action, a link for people to sign a petition, a phone call to their elected official, attending a specific meeting at a specific time. Those are different kinds of campaigns. So an example of a program would be a trail cleanup that can happen monthly or quarterly or twice a year, depending on the need. And that's a way for any Joe or Jane citizen to show up. They may not come to every session, but they can kind of plug in when it's convenient for them. They feel like they're contributing to the overall vision of a safer place to walk and bicycle by making the trail a cleaner place. Plenty of other examples out there of good programs, but again, they're ongoing and they generally have a slow build and are a great way to engage volunteers on the front end. A campaign, on the other hand, that clear win, a ribbon cutting is an obvious example. You want to get a bike lane on Main Street. Once that bike lane is put in and you have a ribbon cutting with your mayor and other elected officials, that's the win. That's a great way to engage people and show them that your organization is getting meaningful things done that are clear milestones getting you towards your vision. Programs help people know that you're doing consistent good work and are engaging volunteers. Campaigns are showing the broader community and importantly donors that your organization is getting meaningful, tangible things done. So those can be useful ways to think about the various objectives that you might want to think about as you're looking to achieve your 3 to 5 goals with your initial strategic campaign. Burnout. This has to be talked about with these brand new kinds of organizations because typically they start with a very small group, sometimes only 2 or 3 people who are extremely passionate about the issue. And I've seen it happen so many times with local advocacy groups that those 2 or 3 individuals, sometimes a single individual, can do so much of the work on top of their own personal life, their own work life, their real day job, that they can become really burned out, and an organization that had a great start after 2 or 3 years suddenly has lost all of its momentum and isn't getting anything done. You can avoid this burnout by being conscientious about the issues on the front end. The mission is always more important than the individuals involved. It's impossible to avoid having the organization associated with a spokesperson, particularly one who's charismatic and passionate and always involved and at every meeting. But you need to be mindful as the steering committee and as the board of directors to not make it about an individual. You don't want it to become the Joe Blow Bicycle Coalition or the James Smith Trails Organization. It still needs to be about the mission and the vision so that it's for the whole community and not just associated with one person. You want to run good meetings. We've all been in terrible meetings, meetings that go on for way too long, meetings that don't have a clear purpose. You need to have an agenda. You should only meet to make decisions. Updates can easily be submitted by email a week before the meeting, and you should make space in the meeting only for questions, not for people to read updates to the rest of the group. That is a waste of everyone's time and can easily make everybody feel burnt out about attending meetings at all. So make sure you've got an agenda, make sure you're meeting to make a decision about something or to ask important questions about updates. And then finally, even if you've got a great consensus-based model for making decisions, some single individual needs to be in charge of the meeting. You have to have a leader at the meeting who can keep everyone in the room on task and on time so that meetings don't become 2-hour affairs of just people complaining about whatever comes up in their mind. So those are some tips for good meetings. As a new organization, there's going to be no shortage of important things that need to be done. You have to learn to say no. Once upon a time, I was on the board of directors for an advocacy group in Georgia about walking and biking issues, and we had a board member whose nickname became We Oughta, because all they ever said at meetings was, we ought to do X, we ought to do Y, and we just couldn't do those things. So unless you're going to step up and say, I am going to lead this program and get volunteers for it, it's not helpful to say we oughta to the rest of the group, because then you're just throwing ideas against the wall and never sticking with them or getting any of them accomplished. By having a strategic plan with clearly defined goals and objectives of who's doing what when, it's easier to say no. So that's a great value to having that inaugural strategic plan. It's important to cultivate new leaders. That's why having good, compelling, enjoyable, and fun programs are so important. You need to have at least one program that's going to get people involved. Most board members and eventual board presidents and vice presidents start off as volunteers with programs and organizations. So to cultivate new leaders, you've got to be mindful of those folks who are showing up consistently and invite them to become leaders in the organization. And this can circle back to the first bullet point so that it's about the mission and not about the founding individuals of the organization. And lastly, make sure you leverage that technology. You don't have to be a computer scientist with 10 years experience as a website coder to get your information out there to the public. There are plenty of free social media channels that everyone is using nowadays, and it's so easy to get set up on those with a minimum of technical expertise, and you can start engaging with people immediately through a Facebook page, through Instagram, and through Twitter. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Maggie, who's going to tell you about a more specific example.
Hello, I'm Maggie Ardito, President and co-founder of the St. Johns River to Sea Loop Alliance. I'm going to talk to you about the challenges of raising a small trail advocacy nonprofit and how partnering might make it easier. So it all starts usually with a few dedicated people who want to make a difference, but it takes more than good intentions. First, as Brent was saying, it takes the right vision. It needs to be one that can be clearly articulated and bounded. A long-term goal that is shared by the core group, but it can't be all things to all people. Then you need the right team, strong, dedicated people that share the vision as stated, and not some tangential motivation that can lead to dissension downstream. So that gets back to stating what the vision is and bounding it and sticking with that. Then you need a strong leader who can grow and motivate a team to action. You need, and then it needs to be the right time, some catalyst moment that says this is an idea whose time has come. And you need to make sure that you have the right contacts and influence. And this is really important. If you don't have them with your core group, go out and recruit someone who does. Do your homework and get well-connected people actively involved before you launch so that they feel part of it and will bring in their contacts and influence these important people to support the group. Remember, each board member demands an investment of effort and energy. So your challenge is to form a core team of people who contribute at least one of the following: time, money, knowledge and experience, or contacts and influence. Once you have all these things, you are launch ready. All you need from here, it's a simple matter of commitment, perseverance, and a truckload of effort and energy sustained over an extended period of time. Here's what Ryan Gravel of the Atlanta Beltline says you need, and I want to emphasize here the politics. Don't forget the politics. This is where your contacts and influence comes in. You can't succeed without champions among the elected officials. So once you launch your nonprofit, you'll discover it demands all the same things that any business demands, and then some. First, there are the legal hoops that you have to go through to make sure that you get established as a 501c3 charitable organization, and that you can sustain that over time, and that you have a set of bylaws that everyone can buy into. Then you need to build a strong collaborative board who has both the time and the will to work hard toward your mission. And you have to manage the mission. Mission creep is one of the main enemies of success because it can destroy any well-intentioned group. You need at least some funding. Most people expect to make some personal investment up front, but hopefully you won't be all self-funded, at least not forever. Then it turns out you need a whole array of skills and technical expertise: website development, newsletter publishing, social media, GIS mapping, route planning, graphic arts, accounting and financial reporting, and just generally running the business and grant writing. Most people don't have all these, and if you don't have it and you can't afford to pay for it, then you have no choice but to learn it, and that's also an investment of effort and energy. So there's a lot to it. You'll quickly discover that you can't get anywhere without partnering. And as you mature, you'll find you need to grow by way of events, and events demand volunteers. Managing volunteers with a tight deadline can be a lot like herding a mixed band of wildcats and turtles in a race. So it's a skill set all its own that needs to be learned. But today's focus is on partnering. We could spend a day on any one of these topics, but today we're going to focus on partnering. So, but once you've assembled all these elements and all these important parts to your nonprofit, what is your process? Is there a relevant cookbook that you can follow step by step, or do you just have to take a huge leap of faith get airborne, and then start building the plane while flying it. I'm afraid we did it the latter way, and as a result, I have stockpiled a vast store of lessons learned the hard way that I hope might make the journey a little less painful for others. Here's a little bit about our story, the St. Johns River to Sea Loop Alliance. We are a Florida 501c3 charitable organization formed in 2016 with the mission to fulfill the promise of the St. Johns River to Sea Loop, to advance, advocate, support, promote, and protect the loop. The loop is a 260-mile shared use trail that shares the spine and complementary route of the East Coast Greenway. After a long struggle, in 2016, the loop was designated as one of 2 top priority Florida state sun trails eligible for State Department of Transportation funding. The reality is it's now 43% complete, and our mission is to get it completed, used, and recognized. As you can see in the picture, it runs from St. Augustine down to Titusville along the spine route, and the other route to the west of DeBerry and Palatka back to St. Augustine is complementary route. So here are some of the things we do, and I'm going to spin through this really quickly. We organize trail-oriented events. We develop both interactive and printed maps for trail use and trail promotion. We develop and maintain the website and the social media presence. We publish in the Loop newsletter to 1,200 recipients, so that requires contact management. We make presentations to various organizations around the Loop. We collaborate on branding, logos, and graphics. We design and erect kiosk signs and t-shirts and Loop gear. We obtain grants and raise funds. We monitor and contribute to routing studies, advocate and develop champions, organize stakeholder workshops and summits, and work with committees, promote and support related organizations, and give seminars at the local outdoor outfitter shops. We do all this with no staff, only a few volunteers, and limited funding. I'm chagrined to say that after 4 years, when I say we, it's still very much the royal we, and as Brent was saying, definitely it's an overload, and we need to be developing more leaders, and that's something that needs to be up in our priorities. But we are not giving up on our mission to fulfill the promise of the Loop. Just a little bit about our social media. We have a really nice website that not only highlights everything that's going on all the time, but also has excellent maps of the Loop, which we developed in our GIS, and also some Google Maps. We have a Facebook page that's very up to date with lots of posts, and we have another Facebook page that's specifically about trail advocacy, and then we have a meetup group for our events. So these things are really important to being a strong voice for the Loop, and that this is the way we get the word out all around the 5 counties of the Loop. So no one except the big guys can really get very far without partnering. But so partnering is vital, but it has its own set of complications, and it's not always productive. I throw this picture up as some of the key partnerships that we have explored and developed. Success demands strong partnerships in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. And the point of this graphic is that there's a vast number of potential partners, but exploration and relationship building takes time, and we often found ourselves stumbling down blind alleys and meeting with a lot of passive resistance, which is the worst thing you can encounter because you don't really know when to quit investing. But if you choose wisely, you can come up with some big wins in each of the sectors, and we've been very lucky to have nurtured several strong partnerships in each sector. So here are some guidelines we've developed to determine if a partnership is worth pursuing. First, Is there a true shared mission or a shared passion? I like Ryan Gravel's quote here. It's more than infrastructure, it's our way of life. Is it symbiotic? Is there mutual benefit to both parties? Another word for that is synergy. Is the combination of our two organizations greater than the sum of the parts? To get there, organizations must be open, collaborative, and non-competitive. And if there are barriers, you need to work to find a way to manage them. Finally, can this partner fill a gap by providing some vital element that our organization lacks, whether this is resources, contacts, influence, or knowledge and expertise? I love this quote by Ryan Gravel. Access to topical expertise is often limited by the siloed nature of expertise and the opaque language of experts. This is so true, and it can be a real barrier. If you've ever tried, for instance, to talk to government GIS people, you'll know exactly what he means by opaque language. Without a common language, there can be no communication and no basis for partnership. So let's look at an example of a potentially great partnership. Let's look at an organization that not only has vast relevant knowledge, but is willing to share that knowledge. This is an organization called Aspire Institute. Everyone knows that Holland is the most cycle-friendly nation, and my husband and I, we know it firsthand because we spend every summer cycling in Europe, and we always start and spend time in Holland. You can always tell when you cross the border into another country because it's less friendly and less easy to get around. There's just no place that compares with Holland. So here's a group with an American founder who's living in Holland, who has founded a group that's teaching the Dutch how to be even better at what they do. And at the same time, she's willing to come back to the US and share that knowledge. As you can see, she just spoke at the Bike League Summit. In Holland, there are more bicycles than people. In many parts of Holland, 60% of the daily trips are made by bicycle. But it wasn't always that way. In 1960, they were just as car-centric and traffic congested as we are. And traffic deaths were rising at an alarming rate. And road planners were actually plotting to make things worse by putting freeways through the cities. So what changed? How did they go from the left picture to the right picture? It was a totally grassroots movement led by the women. They said, stop murdering our children. They garnered enough public will to change the direction and to transform Holland into the happiest, most people-friendly place on earth. This is knowledge we can all use in our efforts, so this is clearly a partnership worth pursuing. Of course, we'd all love to have dozens of strong partnerships, but we have limited resources to invest in developing them. Success means return must exceed investment. And it's a delicate balance, and working with the wrong partner can cost more than it benefits. So to help with this triage, I developed this little chart to gauge the potential value of partnerships. As you can see on the left red side, some relationships are competitive, some are opportunistic for just a short time, whereas others form a true partnership. What is the motivation of your potential partner? Is it purely self-interest? Do you share interest in a specific goal, or do you really share a long-term shared cause? How much trust can the two organizations have in each other? Is it wary? Is it limited to share some specific information but not others, or is it true trusted community? And finally, what is it you're willing to share? Is it just data? Data is hard to get, but it's easy to share, and data like statistics can help us all to build our cause. But it's when you get into information, knowledge, and wisdom that people are willing to share. that you can really start to reap rewards. And when you finally get to the point where you are willing to empower each other, you can really both be mutually empowered. So your impact can be slight, just an acknowledge each other as existing, which you can list each other on your website. That takes no effort at all. And it does help with name recognition. You can assist and work on joint projects, or you can work on the longer term shared programs. But to be a real game changer is when you get over to the right and you're really working together and sharing your resources to a shared, toward a shared vision. So how do we get to the green zone? What are the things that we can do? Consider some of the possibilities. Is there perhaps, or could there be a path for trail and bike advocacy groups to follow, some kind of a model or a methodology, a pattern, a how-to cookbook, or best practices, some kind of a model like that? Could there be an association for mutual support? Several existing organizations are trying to bolt this role onto their current agenda, but maybe a grassroots initiative focused specifically on synergistic partnerships could be more productive. And finally, are there actually shared tools and expertise, modules, GIS mapping capabilities, website development capabilities, and even some shared resources that we might share? So we have a chance to seize the moment. What can we do here and now? I hope you will connect via email, visit our website, like us on Facebook. We can take baby steps. We can share information, resources. But if we go back to business as usual, we might miss a golden opportunity. We can envision bigger steps. And now it's your turn to think about what can we do to make a more human-friendly, bike-friendly place to live. If you want to be one of the game changers, let's start an email discussion. And I'll pass the presentation back now to Brent so he can tell you where we can go from here.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Really great information. While we really hoped that we could see everyone in person in Jacksonville for our actual session, we hope that this is the next best thing, and that all of you who are thinking about starting a new advocacy nonprofit or already have a new one and you're looking to strengthen its capacity and make it more efficient, got something of use from this presentation. If you have any questions, you can see our contact information here, Maggie's email, my email, and if you're on Twitter, I'm also on Twitter at Greenway_Brent. Feel free to send a question to either of us by email or to me on Twitter and use the hashtag Greenway Summit so that we can keep track of all these great question and answers that we have. So again, thank you to my co-presenter, Maggie Ardito with the St. John's River to Sea Loop Alliance. And thank you all for your time and attention to this session. We look forward to seeing your questions soon.